Imagine being ridiculed in a room full of billionaires, laughed at for your clothes, your job, your very existence. Now imagine silencing them all, with nothing but your words. Tonight's story will take you into the glittering heart of Qatar's elite, where one American waitress, dismissed as a nobody, turned the tables on the most powerful man in the room. And trust me, you won't see the ending coming. If stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button right now, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and let's dive in. The chandeliers of the Noor Crown Hotel shimmered like frozen rain above the private dining hall. Outside, the fictional coastal city of Safiya Al Bahr glittered against the Persian Gulf, its skyline like blades of glass cutting into the night. Inside, the air was thick with perfume, cigar smoke, and the false laughter of people too rich to care who they crushed beneath their heels. At the head of the table sat Rashid Al Mansour, a 52-year-old shipping magnate whose empire stretched across the Gulf. His silk suit gleamed under the lights, his silver beard trimmed sharp, his presence demanding. He was the kind of man who thrived on making others feel small. To his right sat Lena, his 23-year-old daughter, home from her studies abroad. Her dark eyes scanned the room like a camera, recording every detail, every cruelty. The rest of the table was a parade of egos. A government minister with wine-stained lips and a crooked tie, a media baron whose Rolex glinted each time he lifted his fork, and Samira Al-Jad, a socialite whose pearls sparkled brighter than her smile was real. Into this lion's den stepped Emily Carter, a 25-year-old American waitress. Her plain black uniform clung to her after 12 relentless hours on her feet. Her shoes were scuffed, her hands trembled faintly as she balanced a tray of crystal glasses. A faint scar above her eyebrow caught the chandelier's light. Moments earlier in the kitchen, her phone had buzzed with a message that knocked the breath from her chest. Insurance denied. Mom's treatment canceled. She shoved it back into her apron, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and forced her breathing steady. Then she walked back into the hall, carrying trays like armor. But to the guests, she was invisible. Worse than invisible, she was a target. Rashid's sharp voice cut across the table in Arabic, his words deliberate, cruel. A creature like that dares touch my glass? The minister roared with laughter, slamming his palm against the table. Samira covered her mouth dramatically as though hiding a joke too cruel to repeat. The media baron smirked, shaking his head. This is the best they could find? Emily's hand shook as she placed the crystal goblet before Rashid. Her head was bowed, her face unreadable. But then, slowly she lifted her gaze. And in flawless Arabic, calm and steady, she replied, "The glass does not lower the one who holds it. It only reflects the dignity of the one who drinks from it." The chandeliers seemed to stop swaying. Forks froze mid-air. Conversations choked off mid-laugh. The lion had been answered. The silence after Emily's words was deafening. Guests stared, their wine glasses frozen mid-air, as though the chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. For the first time in years, Rashid Al Mansour had been challenged, and not by a rival tycoon, but by a waitress in scuffed shoes. Rashid forced a laugh, brittle and false. Switching to English, he waved a hand dismissively. She learned a tourist phrase. "Don't be impressed." Samira leaned forward, her pearls clinking against her glass. Her voice was syrupy but venomous. "Exactly. Parrots can mimic too. That doesn't make them people." A ripple of laughter followed, weak and uncertain, like a dying fire struggling for oxygen. Emily didn't flinch. She moved to pour water for the minister, her hands steady, her face calm. Then, without warning, she began to recite. Her voice flowed like a river over stone, precise, melodic, every syllable carrying centuries of weight. She was reciting verses from al-Barkani, the legendary 10th century Qatari poet whose works even scholars hesitated to attempt aloud. The words danced across the marble walls, heavy with rhythm, alive with history. The minister froze. A scholar at the far end of the table dropped his fork, his voice trembling. That is flawless. Even I could not recite those lines without error. Gasps spread across the hall. Lena's eyes widened, her lips parting in shock. She's perfect, she whispered almost to herself. Samira tried to laugh, but the sound cracked like glass underfoot. Pretty words for a waitress. That's all they are. Rashid leaned forward, his silver beard catching the light, his eyes narrowing like a predator regaining its footing. Poetry is easy. Knowledge is harder. The minister smirked, wine dripping from the corner of his mouth. Let's see if she knows anything real. The media baron, his Rolex gleaming, grinned as he leaned forward. In fluent Arabic, he posed a complex question about Qatar's fictional Al Safina shipping corridor, tariffs, trade routes, oil numbers, and diplomatic agreements, all twisted into a verbal trap. The question was designed to confuse, to humiliate, to expose her as a fraud. Emily tilted her head slightly, her eyes sharp. She waited as though weighing each word carefully. Then she spoke. Her Arabic was clear, steady, unbroken. She laid out trade routes, referenced tariffs, and even cited agreements signed in the Majlis Al-Nur just months earlier. She dismantled the trap piece by piece until nothing was left but truth. The minister's jaw fell open. He tugged at his crooked tie, his face flushed with embarrassment. Then, reluctantly, he clapped. That is not just fluency, he said, his voice shaking. That is expertise. The applause was hesitant at first, but undeniable. The room had shifted. The mockery had been silenced. And all eyes turned back to Emily. Who is she? What happened next would not only shatter Rashid's pride but strip the entire table of their illusions. Because Emily Carter carried more than words in her apron. She carried a secret that would make even Qatar's most powerful man tremble. Samira Al-Jad swirled her champagne flute, her painted lips curling. Let's not get carried away, she said loudly, her eyes sweeping across the table. Anyone can memorize lines. She's still the help. A ripple of agreement followed. The minister leaned back in his chair, smirking now that the spotlight had shifted. Exactly. She's amusing, but let's not mistake performance for substance. Another guest, a young businessman in a velvet jacket, leaned across the table, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Tell me, do they train all waitresses like you in America? Or are you just an accident? Laughter broke out again, sharper this time, desperate to drown the unease Emily had caused. But Emily kept moving, steady, refilling glasses with water, adjusting silverware with precise care. Her silence was louder than their cruelty. A woman in a red gown leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the light. She whispered just loud enough for others to hear. Look at her shoes. They're falling apart. She probably found them in a thrift shop. The table snickered. Emily's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She placed a napkin beside the media baron's plate, her hand steady, her face unreadable. And yet, for those paying attention like Lena, there was something in her eyes. A flash of defiance. A storm waiting. The minister wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his crooked tie slipping lower. His words were deliberate, biting. If she's truly as clever as she seems, let her solve something practical. Let her speak not as a poet, but as an economist. Rashid nodded sharply, seizing the moment. His voice was cold steel. Just show us you understand the world we rule. Tell us, girl, what does the Al Safina corridor mean to global oil prices next quarter? The room leaned in. This wasn't a question for waitresses. This was a question for ministers, bankers, analysts. It was meant to break her. Emily's hand paused on the pitcher. She set it down carefully, then lifted her head. Her Arabic flowed, calm and clear. She dissected their question layer by layer, citing statistics, historical precedents, and even predicting the ripple effects of upcoming negotiations. She spoke like someone who had not just studied the subject, but lived inside its numbers. Her explanation left no gaps, no weaknesses. When she finished, the silence was thick. The minister tugged at his collar, his face flushed with humiliation. The media baron coughed into his wine, eyes darting away. And slowly, reluctantly, the minister began to clap. Gasps spread around the table. Some guests whispered, others leaned toward each other in disbelief. Lena's eyes glistened, her lips curling into the faintest smile. Samira's face burned red, her pearls clicking nervously as she swallowed. "It's mimicry," she blurted, desperate. She rehearsed all of this. No waitress could know these things. But no one laughed this time. The old balance of power was cracking. The room was no longer laughing at Emily. It was watching her. And Rashid knew it. His fingers drummed harder against the table, his silver beard hiding the tightening of his jaw. Sweat beaded along his hairline. For the first time in years, the king of the table was losing his crown. Emily Carter, the servant they thought invisible, had become the center of the room. The elites who once laughed now whispered, their eyes fixed on Emily. The minister sat red-faced, the media baron had lost his smirk, and Samira clutched her pearls like they could anchor her sinking pride. Only Rashid Al Mansour remained unbroken, or at least, pretending to be. His voice cut through the silence, harsh and desperate. "Enough," he snapped. "Poetry and numbers mean nothing. You are still a servant. A servant is born to serve. That is all." The words echoed across the room, cruel and final, as if spoken from a throne. But Emily didn't flinch. Instead, she placed her tray on a side table, folded her hands, and raised her eyes to meet his. The name that shook the room. Her voice was quiet, but it carried like thunder. "Yes, I was a servant. But I was also the student of Professor Karim Al-Haddad, the language advisor to Qatar's Council of State." The room erupted. Gasps burst from every corner. The scholar at the far end nearly dropped his glass. His voice shook as he spoke. "Impossible. Al-Haddad only trained the brightest, the most disciplined, the chosen few." Lena's eyes widened. Her napkin tumbled to the floor as she whispered, "Baba, she's telling the truth." Rashid's face went pale, his silver beard unable to mask the sudden tremor in his jaw. "Lies?" he spat, slamming his palm against the table. "Anyone can claim a name." But Emily's lips curved faintly, not into a smile, but into something sharper. She reached into her apron and pulled out an envelope, its edges frayed, its seal cracked but unmistakable. She unfolded the paper slowly, deliberately, and read aloud in flawless Arabic. "Full honorary scholarship granted to Emily Carter. Signed, Rashid Al Mansour." The hall exploded. Guests, shouts, chairs scraping back. The minister stood, his voice trembling. "This cannot be. Years ago, Rashid signed hundreds. And yet..." The scholar shook his head in awe. If she studied under Al-Haddad, if she bore his discipline, then this woman is extraordinary. Rashid's hand clutched the tablecloth so tightly his knuckles turned white. The lion of Safiya Al Bahr, humiliated by a scarred, scuffed, plain-uniformed waitress who carried his own forgotten signature. Emily's gaze did not waver. Her words cut deeper than any insult. "You forget many. But we never forget you." The guests erupted into chaos. Some clapped in awe. Others whispered feverishly, their eyes darting from Rashid to Emily like they were watching an empire collapse in real time. Samira's face flushed crimson. She tried to speak, but her words stumbled. "She's lying, this is staged." But no one listened. The minister shook his head, muttering, "Unbelievable. Unthinkable." And Lena, tears streaming down her cheeks, stood. Her chair screeched against the marble as she crossed the room, ignoring every gasp, every stare. She threw her arms around Emily, holding her tight. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "For all of this." Emily held her, steady as stone, her eyes still locked on Rashid. The applause came then, not hesitant this time, but roaring, crashing like waves against marble walls. The dining hall that once mocked her now stood on its feet, clapping for the waitress who had silenced them all. And Rashid? He sat frozen at the head of the table, his empire crumbling in the echo of his own forgotten promise. The applause in the Noor Crown Hotel shook the chandeliers. The same voices that had laughed at Emily Carter minutes earlier were now clapping until their palms stung. Some out of awe, some out of guilt, others simply because they didn't dare stay silent. Rashid Al-Mansour sat frozen at the head of the table, the king of Safiya Al Bahr reduced to a pale, trembling shadow. His hand clutched the tablecloth like it was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. And Emily? She bowed her head slightly, as if the storm around her had nothing to do with her at all. She slipped the scholarship letter back into her apron, picked up her tray, and calmly resumed her work. That simple act, continuing to serve, carried more weight than any words could. The next morning, by dawn, shaky phone recordings of the confrontation had gone viral. Hashtags lit up across Qatar's networks. Hashtag the waitress who spoke truth. Hashtag Rashid exposed. Hashtag words are power. Millions replayed the moment she silenced the room with her line about the crystal glass. Millions more shared the clip of her reciting al-Barkani's poetry with flawless mastery. Comment sections erupted. She destroyed him with pure dignity. Rashid forgot her name, but she made sure the world remembered. Who is Emily Carter? We need more people like her. Within 24 hours, sponsors began pulling out of Rashid's conglomerate. By the end of the week, his board had called an emergency meeting. Contracts were canceled. Investors fled. By Friday, the once untouchable titan of Safiya Al Bahr was out, stripped of his titles, his empire collapsing under the weight of scandal. Samira Al-Jad found herself blacklisted. Her name disappeared from invitation lists she once dominated. The minister's drunken smirk became a meme, his campaign ads pulled overnight. The media baron's company bled advertisers, his carefully polished image ruined. One by one, the predators at that table paid the price. And Emily? She returned to the hotel the next evening, tying her apron the same way, wiping down tables, carrying trays. She still worked double shifts. She still sent money home to Ohio for her mother's medical bills. But something had shifted forever. Her co-workers no longer looked at her with pity. They looked at her with respect. They whispered her name like a prayer. One evening, a little girl no older than 10 approached her, clutching a crumpled drawing. "I saw you on the internet," the girl said shyly. "You're brave." The drawing showed a woman standing tall, surrounded by falling stars. Emily's hands trembled as she accepted it. She knelt, meeting the girl's gaze. "Thank you," she said softly, folding the paper with care. Her co-workers watched silently, their eyes misty. They knew they weren't just working beside a waitress anymore. They were standing beside a symbol. That night, walking home through the glowing streets of Safiya Al Bahr, Emily brushed her fingers over the worn envelope in her pocket. The voice of Professor Karim Al-Haddad echoed in her memory, the man who had taught her Arabic by candlelight in a cramped Doha apartment. Words are power. Use them wisely. And she had. Her scar caught the streetlight as she looked up at the skyline. The city hummed around her, indifferent yet alive. And she walked steady, her silence now both a shield and a sword. Emily Carter, the servant they mocked, had become the mirror they could no longer escape. You've been there, haven't you? Underestimated. Judged for your clothes, your accent, your job. But then, in a single moment, you proved them wrong. Emily's story is your story too, a reminder that dignity doesn't come from titles or wealth. It comes from knowing who you are. If this story hit you where it hurts, take a second to smash that like button, subscribe for more powerful tales, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Because stories like this remind us we're never alone in the fight to be seen.